2020, France had military forces on the ground in 14 African countries. It had been the dominant foreign military power in West Africa for 60 years. Then, in 18 months, it was gone. 3 coups, 3 expulsions, and a geopolitical shift that is still reshaping the continent. This is the story of how France lost West Africa and why its position was always structurally unsustainable. France's military presence in West Africa did not begin with terrorism. It began with independence. When France granted formal independence to its West African colonies in 1960, it negotiated agreements known as the Francafrique network that kept French forces on African soil, French companies in African markets, and French advisors inside African governments. These were not temporary arrangements. They were structural. 14 countries, dozens of base agreements, a single currency tied to the French franc. The arrangement served French interests in energy, mining, and strategic influence. It also, for decades, provided a degree of security to governments that relied on French backing to survive. But it contained a fundamental contradiction. France was providing security to states whose populations were growing, whose grievances were deepening, and whose patience with external dependency was running out. In 2012, that contradiction became a crisis. A rebellion by Tuareg separatists in northern Mali, exploiting weapons flooded into the region after the collapse of Libya, created an opening for jihadist groups aligned with Al-Qaeda. France intervened militarily in January 2013. Operation Serval drove jihadist forces out of northern Mali's major towns within weeks. It was swift, effective, and widely praised. But it solved the symptom, not the cause. In 2014, France converted the operation into a permanent counter-terrorism mission, Operation Barkhane, covering 5 Sahel countries and deploying 5,500 troops. For the next 8 years, jihadist-controlled territory in the Sahel expanded by an estimated 500%. The French military presence did not reverse the insurgency. It contained some of it at enormous cost, while the underlying conditions that generated it remained untouched. By 2020, France was spending €600 million a year in the Sahel, with no clear exit and no evidence that the mission was ending. The coups did not come from nowhere. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, a pattern had been building for years. Civilian governments seen as corrupt, ineffective, and too close to foreign powers. Security forces frustrated by inadequate equipment and unclear missions. Populations exhausted by insecurity and disconnected from the benefits of resource extraction. In August 2020, Mali's military removed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. A second coup followed in May 2021, consolidating junta control. In January 2022, Burkina Faso's army ousted President Roch Kabore. A second coup 8 months later brought Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power. French special forces were given 30 days to leave. In July 2023, Niger's presidential guard detained President Mohamed Bazoum. The junta, the CNSP, demanded France withdraw its 1,500 remaining troops. After months of refusal, France complied in December 2023. 3 governments removed, 3 French military presences ended. The same argument made in each capital: sovereignty, security, self-determination. France described each coup as illegal and called the leaders illegitimate. But legitimacy, in the Sahel in 2023, was no longer something France had the standing to define. The withdrawals were not just symbolic. They required the dismantling of infrastructure that had taken decades to build. French bases in Gao, Kidal, and Timbuktu, established during Operation Serval, were handed over or abandoned. Equipment was transferred. Intelligence networks built over years were dissolved. Into the space France vacated, a different actor had already arrived. Wagner Group, the Russian private military company that later became Africa Corps under the Russian Ministry of Defense, had been operating in Mali since late 2021. The transition was not accidental. Malian junta leaders had approached Wagner directly, seeking a security partner without the political conditions that French cooperation carried. France had spent 9 years arguing that its military presence was the only viable security architecture in the Sahel. The juntas disagreed, and they had the sovereignty to prove it. In September 2023, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger formalized what had been implicit. They signed the Liptako-Gourma Charter, creating the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. The AES is a mutual defense pact that explicitly operates outside the ECOWAS framework and outside any architecture in which France plays a role. In January 2024, the three countries announced their withdrawal from ECOWAS entirely. What replaces France is not yet clear. Russia provides military personnel. China provides infrastructure finance. Turkey has increased diplomatic engagement. But none of these actors have made the same depth of commitment or carried the same weight of entanglement that France did. The deeper question is not who fills the French role. It is whether any external power can. The conditions that produced the coup Cascade, poverty, insecurity, governance failure, and a population that had lost faith in its institutions, have not changed. France lost West Africa not in 18 months, but over 60 years. The coups were the visible end of a process that had been building since independence. The question now is what the Sahel builds in its place.